There we go. We can see it.
Okay, you see the picture of me?
Yep.
All right. Hey, welcome everybody to our session today on risk assessment. My name's John Bassett. I'm GSI's Chief Technology Officer and Chief Information Security Officer. I'm a certified ISO 27001 lead implementer. I'm also a certified CISO. So hopefully the things I have to share today, I also have about 38 years of IT experience. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm getting up there in age. So anyway, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to be talking about the risk assessment only piece of working with information security management system. You can't have a, I've done previous sessions on information management security system, but and we did an in-depth on the different kinds of frameworks. But for those that didn't attend that, I'm going to do at least a quick review of the frameworks and whether or not you would use one. We'll talk about risk assessment, why you need one. I'll show you some simple steps to complete the assessment. In a few areas, I might get a little deep. It depends. And then we'll talk about, recording your findings, reviewing some things to make you successful in getting your risk assessment at your company done. And then briefly talk about, going it alone, doing the risk assessment yourself or get help from somebody that's been there, done that. And specifically, if you're in the ISO world, there's a high probability that you'll need to get assistance if you're a manufacturer that are looking for ISO 27001 certification. And then maybe some next steps to get you moving with your own risk assessment. Okay, so I promised you a quick review of the frameworks, the two most common frameworks for doing security and the two frameworks that provide you with very detailed material on conducting a risk assessment and risk treatment are ISO 27001. Most recent is the 2013 version. And I'll get a little more about the different versions as well. And the other is the NIST Cybersecurity framework, which is common throughout. So those are the two most common. They're not the only ones, and I'll talk about that a little later. Some other frameworks that you could use. You can even do this without a framework. Some people say they like features of ISO and NIST CSF. And when I get to talking about a little more about the NIST CSF controls, I'll explain why. Maybe some people would use the planning stages of ISO, but the details of NIST. So those are the two general ones that people use. So what is a risk assessment and why do you need one? Okay, we got a guy here on the left-hand side. He's about to jump off a cliff. But more than likely, and when it comes to business, it might be somebody pushing you off the cliff. So basically, one of the things you need to do is in what is a risk assessment? It's looking at your company and finding things that could happen that'd be a negative impact on your company. And some risks, a flood might destroy a paper system, or a cyber attack could harm your computer system. In the case of like GSI, we're a managed services provider. We have a couple of small offices, but we have people in 25 different states. There are very few natural disasters that would harm us. A tornado taking out one person's home, yeah, it'll affect us, but 98% of the company's going to continue on. We might have one person that gets hurt or something like that we have to deal with, but the company's going to continue to go on. So you have to look at everything in your company to see if it's a risk. It could be information security, it could be physical security, it could be pieces of paper, it could be people talking to each other. So, one of the reasons why we'll talk a little more about why you might need one in a minute, but just a few definitions. Opportunities refer to the actions that a company could undertake in order to improve security. such as hiring a CISO or buying a new tape backup unit that's faster, or moving your backup into the cloud so that you don't have to be worried about the physical location. So that's what an opportunity is. And when we start talking about risk treatment, we'll talk more about that. An incident is a specific event that requires investigation and potentially mitigation with the response team. So let's say, if you get an opportunity, there's a video, or excuse me, it's a movie called The Inside Man, and so far I know of the first version and the second version. The first one was simply amazing. As a security guy, I was very entertained by it. Better than watching the Hallmark Channel for a security guy. And it basically showed at the very beginning of the movie an incident occurring where an outside nefarious attack started occurring. It was a denial of service attack. Well, that's an incident that occurred. And the particular company that they showed actually had a response team in place to try to cut cut the cord, keep people from doing further damage, and then repairing the situation. So just keep in mind an incident is something actually happened to you. Identifying your risks and planning mitigation will help prevent or reduce the impact of an incident. Another reason why you might need one is because you need to be able to be ready for an incident. It's not a matter of if you will get attacked, it's when and to what degree. And it might be as simple as a phishing email. You probably have all seen a phishing email. You may have even clicked on it. Hopefully you didn't get caught. Hopefully you have education that um, helps you at your company do fish testing. It's something GSI is going to be offering to smaller companies and medium-sized companies, is fish testing as a service. Designing a program is a special skill. We have a guy that is so good at designing fish emails. He called me up and asked for permission to do a fish testing um, example. He set it up, and I still clicked on it. And you know what? He did it again. Another thing. He said, "Hey, I'm going to do a fish testing with the president of the company," and he wrote it in such a way and so good I didn't even remember it and clicked on it. So he got me twice. I've been through many different training educations, and you still the best people are going to get caught. It's getting to the point where people just aren't even clicking on any links inside of email, which is anti-productive as well. So, that's when it feels like the bad guys won, was like you won't even open anything up, even when you should. And the worst one, in my opinion, are the links inside of emails that are legitimate, but it doesn't look like it was legitimate. It goes to a strange site. It's a legitimate email from a legitimate source, but the link looks bad. I just don't click them. I generally follow up to the person who sent it, or I said, I'd like to know that this is okay to click on. It looks like a funky link, but you have to plan for those. And that's one of the things you can do in your risk assessment and your risk treatment is, your risk could be defined as people clicking on phishing emails. That's your risk. And what are the chances? Pretty high. What's the frequency? Quite often. But what's the impact? Well, the impact could be devastating. They could get access to financial information. They could get somebody to send gift cards. There's all kinds of things that you can very quickly get, and the mitigation might be additional education, watching online training or having training classes to show people not to click. And then it's also different if you're on a mobile device versus your laptop. You can hover over links on your desktop or your laptop, but it's not as easy to hover over inside a cell phone. So you're subject to multiple avenues of clicking on a fish. Okay, so why do you need uh, a risk assessment? And there are many reasons. The bottom one, maybe it could be the first. Maybe if you're a public company or a government entity, compliance could be the reason. You might, in order to follow Sarbanes-Oxley, or if you're a manufacturing company, maybe in order to work with your key customers, you have to be ISO compliant. Um, but that aside, setting aside compliance, that might be your motivating factor and the way you get your budget set up. But looking at it in a little more detail, think about it, a risk assessment. If you set up a risk assessment to be prepared, what are your risks, and how can you be prepared? Before the age of the internet, you still had to have disaster recovery plans. You still had to have risk assessments, even if you didn't have computerized entry points. It can save you a lot of money when something goes wrong. It keeps you prepared, get you back running faster, and eventually prevent any damage. Um, Financially, I know that a lot of people have cyber insurance for cyber attacks, and even your actual insurance company for non-cyber attacks. They don't cover you if you don't do the things that are outlined in it. For instance, let's just use cybersecurity as an example. If you have cyber insurance, if you have the cyber insurance, but you haven't put in firewalls or antivirus and you get hit with a virus, guaranteed your insurance company is not going to cover you. You said, well, I have insurance, I paid the fee. And they're like, yeah, but you didn't do some basic blocking and tackling, and we specifically exclude it if you're not doing some things to protect yourself. So it can reduce your insurance costs and or assure that you have insurance coverage. So let's this particular example, I'm trying to keep things simple. If you're a large company, a government agency, this might not be the right place for you, because I'm going to try to show you how to do this in something you could do yourself if you wanted to. And maybe if you're a larger company, you have a complete compliance program and you have full-time staff working on these things. I'm kind of making the assumption that the people here might be just a little bit smaller than that. Maybe just trying to pick up some tips on how they can. Whoops, sorry about that, folks. I don't know how that happened, but I ended up backwards real fast. So I'm just going to go through some simple steps to conduct and complete the assessment. So the first thing you need to do is come up with your own methodology. You can buy a methodology. You can say, we're going to follow the ISO 27001, or you can take the free one from NIST and just say, well, you know what, we're going to use the NIST methodology. But either way, you should define your own methodology. Even if you use the NIST framework, you're going to do some things differently than other companies. There are certain components about your business that are very different than other companies, and therefore you should make your own definition. But the recommendation from a lot of the larger training companies, and also mine, is write your own methodology and how you're going to do it. Who's going to be involved in it? Who's going to own different pieces of the process? And some people aren't going to do it voluntarily. You need to know that. If you're in charge of doing risk assessment, you're going to have people that join you. You're going to need partners in this. You're going to need a higher level manager to support you, that's going to uh, make people help you, because this is vital to your business. And again, it is different parts of the organization. If you've got somebody out on a manufacturing floor that has, widget manufacturing as his primary responsibility, may not be as helpful to you, even though what they're doing needs to be protected too. So again, adapt a methodology that's unique to your situation. And again, there are many myths regarding what it should look like. You need who cares? Make it look like what you want it to be. That was one of the biggest problems I had in trying to understand and learn risk assessments. Like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. How am I going to put this together?" Well, you just start reading and saying, sit back and think. It's like, what's a problem for my business? Okay, GSI is an example. We don't really have building problems, so I don't have to think about natural disasters. We don't exactly have a formal network, so firewall strategy isn't a big deal for us. But we have cloud services, we have SaaS services, we have email, we have Office 365, we have an ERP system, we use HubSpot. There's a lot of different things that we do. We have HR files. We have to work in California and New York where there's privacy data laws. We work in Europe, GDPR affects us. So you kind of just got to step back and think about, what do you do as a business? And we're a services organization. I know some of you that are on here. I know you personally, and I know you're working for a manufacturing company. All right, you have you have buildings to worry about. You have locations to worry about. You have phones in the building. You have electricity. You have computers. You have equipment. You have water coming into your building for whatever reasons. You have electricity. I mean, there's just you just got to sit back and think. You have payroll. You have people. You have people coming into your building that need to be kept an eye on. So basically, identify the risks that could cause the loss of confidentiality, integrity, and or availability of your information. Okay, that's kind of when you actually kind of start getting tired of hearing those three words, but they're very important: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I try to look at that as like going to the bank. Okay, when you go to the bank, you expect that your funds are going to be available to you, right? You've got $1,000 in the bank. You go there and you need to borrow $100 for the weekend. You expect those funds to be available to you. You also expect that the whole world doesn't know that you have $1,000 into it, and you expect to know that the computer systems are being backed up in the event of a computer crash, and therefore the integrity of your transactions are protected. So that's the example I like to use to explain those three terms. And in the cybersecurity world, you hear them over and over again. Another tough thing is defining who owns the risks. Using GSI as an example, again, I'm in charge of IT. So anything that's sitting in the cloud, anything that's a laptop, anything that's a physical phone or device, I'm the owner. However, we have a software development team as well who has to follow a software development lifecycle. Lena Tuttleman is the risk owner there, not me. So you have to, and we also have an HR manager. The physical files from our HR department is owned by either the head of our HR or our CFO, depending upon whose opinion you are. But you have to find who they are. Um, you have to define the criteria for assessing consequences and assessing the likelihood of the risk. You could have a very big if somebody came in and broke into your computer system, you have to assess that consequence. But you also, which could be huge, right? They break into your computer, they steal all you've got, put you out of business. But let's say you've got all of the necessary protections in place, the likelihood of the risk occurring could be low. So high consequence, low risk. And I actually have got a table I'll show you a sample of where I did kind of a little sample on how I had to assess a risk based on the consequences and the likelihood. And you also have to define how the risk will be calculated, and I'll show you what we did here. In some cases, though, there's some risks that you might just have to accept, and it might be, when it costs more to protect a risk, it might be wise to just accept the risk and try to reduce the likelihood of it. And I'll give you an example. GSI has various systems, and people travel, and we have a lot of people that want to know if we could have a VPN. Well, we looked at the cost of the VPN for everybody, and we're like, all right, what are we doing that isn't already encrypted? So if we put the VPN on, we're encrypting already encrypted traffic. We're not a healthcare. We're not a government company. Do we pay for that VPN, or do we accept the risk of somebody getting hacked? Well, this might be one case where we could accept the risk, because unless you're like doing financial data and get maybe stuck in a man in the middle type attack, like, well, the browser traffic's already encrypted, and it might be something we could live with. So that's just an example. So you need these 5 methods, and anything more is not needed. Don't complicate it, right? You get through. This is a repetitive process. You don't just do this once. You do this year over year. It may be more work the first time you do it, but from then on, it's just revise and tune and replace. And maybe add or change existing things. Okay, so now once you know the rules, and you've got to set those up front, you need to list all of your assets, which we talked about, then the threats and vulnerabilities related to those, the impact and likelihood, and finally, calculate the level of risk. And I've got a sample for you. Okay, so onto your risk assessment implementation. So these are the steps that you have two options if you wish to succeed. This is just a high level how you could get started. You could perform the risk assessment through interviews, and that's not a bad idea. Um, you know, the CISO is usually the Chief Information Security Officer, or whoever is in charge of security at your company. I know some large companies that don't have CISOs. They have CTOs, they have CIOs, and maybe they have an IT manager that shares the responsibility, but regardless, responsible person. Um, and this person will interview people, interview the HR manager, interview the operations manager, interview the sales manager, et cetera, interview the IT team, and start creating responsible persons and basically building a checklist. Okay, another way to do it is to perform workshops with the responsible people, and basically the responsible party will explain the purpose. Performing the interviews will probably yield better results, although it may not be feasible, especially if you don't have a full-time CISO, and maybe it's a 10% project, and your other 90% you got to do your other day job. It might not be possible. You might just need to do one big workshop and get everybody done at the same time. And the final phase is to analyze and evaluate the risk analysis. And there's actually software programs that can do risk analysis for you. I'm not going to go into any of those options here because I'm assuming that you're going to do this yourself at this point. Okay, so one of the things you need to talk about in doing a risk assessment is the idea of risk assessment is to protect your assets. Okay, and what are your assets? And you have to sit and think about it. Okay, so risk assessment is about protecting your assets. Could be your people, your managers, your employees of various levels. And it could also be people that might be visiting some key vendors. You have to think about the people. You also have to think about your media, your electronic systems, the applications that you might be running. Some might be licensed. You might be running Oracle. You might be running SAP, and you might be running some open source applications as well. So you have to identify that. Identify your system software. If you have monitoring tools and or databases, the data in the database, I imagine, is considered very valuable to the right people. So those are not physical assets. They are logical assets, but they are assets no less. And then you have basically your physical assets, documentation, contracts, correspondence, um, and um, training materials, bookkeeping, HR records, physical equipment, buildings. These are all the things that you need to, automobiles, tow motors, racks, etc. There's just a bunch of things that you have to sit and think about. What are your assets? Maybe you don't need to protect all the assets. Maybe you've got a 50-year-old building with a bunch of old equipment, and if you lost it, you didn't care. Well, you just got to jot down what's important to you and what's not, and you may not be the only person that can make that decision. So, oh, sorry, I was already talking about this. I should have flipped the page. Your IT equipment is definitely you need to think about everything. Phone systems, if you have one. I think a lot of people have switched to IP type of things, but still, if you have some older equipment or maybe even some newer phone systems, you still gotta track them. Laptops. The actual physical media, if you are doing your own tape backups, if you have test equipment, alarm systems, lighting. Um, I already mentioned furnitures and safes. You also might need to be worried about backup generators, power equipment, The mail, if you're, not everybody thinks about the mail, but if people are sending you in physical checks and not doing ACH deposits, the mail could be very critical to you, because getting, yeah, you can get people to reissue checks, but it's not always that easy. But power equipment, et cetera, all a part of. I put the Empire State Building there. I thought it was cute to put on as something that you might need to protect that building. What about a plane flying into that? Could be something you need to prepare for as well. I think something did, an airplane did hit it back in the 1930s, a small plane. Okay, so along with risk assessments and all of your assets, what are some of the threats, things that could happen to them? And again, this is just a small list of things that could happen. But I wanted to give you some ideas of things to think about. Um, Application errors or accidental change of information. Looking at GSI, could that happen? Sure. We use NetSuite for our ERP system. Somebody could start, either accidentally or on purpose, start changing data or deleting data. So are backups important to us, even though we're using a SaaS-based solution? Absolutely it is. Users could just make an error, put in the wrong thing. You also have to think about physical threats, like bomb attacks or threats. If a bomb, like a local school here, school my grandson went to, they evacuated the school a month ago. Somebody wrote on a bathroom door that they were going to blow up the building. They didn't actually do it. It was just a kid, but it was a threat and needed to be worried about. Vandalism, huge. I think you guys have seen all the vandalism going on across if you're in the United States. There's quite a bit of it going on, things you have to worry about and protect against. Terrorism has been very important, particularly since World War II. I know that there's a lot of trained terrorists across the world now. Contract breaches are things you might need to protect against. Natural disasters, again, floods, fires, tornadoes, earthquakes, lightning, could hit. Um, Other things that could happen is, somebody in the HR might throw out wrong records, or it might be a fire that, or even something you may not think about. What about deterioration of electronic media? People keep forgetting electronic media is magnetic, and it can deteriorate over time. So just sending something off to Iron Mountain doesn't guarantee that it isn't deteriorating while it sits there. Stealing, fraud, embezzlement. A company that GSI used to do some work with didn't have all their checks and balances in place. They were running JD Edwards ERP, and the person who wrote checks also approved them and wrote herself a check for $750,000. So it can happen. Equipment failure happens all the time, especially with HVAC equipment, power equipment, computer equipment. It happens every day. Might be a bunch of servers or whatever, but something to think about. Malicious code. If you don't have a good software development life cycle, where you don't test your code accurately, it could be a threat to you if you're in the software development business or write your own stuff. Viruses, of course, hitting your system. Phishing. I normally put that on the previous line, but I think it's become so, like, one of the biggest malicious computer hacking, and it deserves mention of its own. And here's why. It's just a lot easier to trick somebody to giving you their credentials, not necessarily knowingly, than to break secure code. Hacking through 256-bit encryption is not easy. Getting an average untrained person to click a link that exposes passwords, et cetera, is a lot easier, and the hackers choose that route. Could be unauthorized access to IT or your records or your network. Maybe you leave a file share open, or everybody, you have a group called XYZ that just happens to have everybody in it, and it gives admin privileges to people. I mean, those are the things you need to think about for sample threats. Okay, so threats and vulnerabilities, very, very similar. The vulnerability, the threat might be breaking into somebody's system, but the vulnerability is that you had weak passwords. So I hope maybe that you can understand that threats and vulnerabilities are similar. The vulnerabilities go into um, a little more detail, and there's just some examples here. I'm not going to read through them all because we're going to run out of time if I do it. You can go through it. And I put up a TRS-80 as like a very old computer system. I did work on these once. I knew an energy, I worked for a company that had an energy control system controlled by a TRS-80. So I just thought I'd throw that in for fun. Okay, so now that you've got your risks defined and you know who the owner is, you know what how the impact of a threat, you know the likelihood of a threat coming, and you've created a risk score. You're only halfway there. Okay, you're only halfway there. You've defined your risks. Now what do you do about it? And that's where you start talking about risk treatment. Of course, not all risks are created equal. You want to focus on the most important ones, the unacceptable risks. For instance, somebody breaking into your network and taking all of your files might be considered an unacceptable risk. All right, so here are the things, these are the 4 things that you can do to protect you from the game of risk. You can apply security controls, and I'm going to talk about that at great length. You can transfer the risk, and good example of that is insurance, right? You've got a particular risk. You can't really apply controls, but you can transfer it to insurance company. You can just choose to avoid the risk. It's like, what, we have a problem where if we build a new facility on the ocean, that there would be a hurricane. So you could avoid the risk by building in the Midwest. That's just a simple example. You can also accept the risk. And that's something you have to think very carefully about. Will it cost you more to do the 3 above than to just accept the risk? For instance, if it costs you $10 million to build that new building and you only have 1 million and you're sitting on the ocean, maybe you just need to accept the risk or try to transfer the risk and get insurance, which it might be harder to do, but you can try. Okay, so well, let's go to the previous example, previous page. Okay, so applying security controls. We're gonna talk about that in the next slide. And here are some sample controls, and these are these also look like frameworks over here on the. Wow, I don't know how that happens. My apologies on that. Let me get forward a few. I moved my mouse and it just kind of plowed through those faster than I can move forward. Okay. The reason why I've chosen these frameworks is because these frameworks all have controls. ISO and NIST being a little more in depth. ISO 27001, it has 14 major controls with 114 subset known as Annex A. And I'll show you Annex A in a little bit. The current release is as of 2013, and it's due for a major update. Another thing to think about is ISO is not a free framework. It's a framework that you get to pay for if you want to go all the way through it. You got to buy it, not expensive. You can also get certified as a manufacturing company. You can get certified in ISO, which you can't in the others. NIST Cyber Security Framework, CSF 800-53. Most recent revision was September 2020. It's current. There are many controls. It's required for federal agencies. If it's a security risk, it's even more intense than that. And it's free to use. If you have to be ISO certified, I'd highly suggest you roll in some CSF. I'll show you the documentation for the CSF. Rev 5, it's much more thorough than ISO. If you're a smaller company and you feel that these majors are not of you don't need the level of detail. You can look at something like COBIT, and it's more of an IT framework, and the controls are not as defined as NIST and ISO. Same thing with COSO. COSO was developed by um, the the AI CPA, which does a lot of the SOC reports. It's more of a financial organization. So COBIT, IT, COSO, but still frameworks that you should consider if you don't need one of the bigger two. Okay, statement of applicability. It's more of an ISO term, and it's required for to pass audit, but it's NIST also starts mentioning applicability in the body of the 800-53. It basically is listing your security profile, lists the results of your risk treatment, etc., why you've implemented and how. It's just a document. It's just a link between the risk and the treatment. And remember, we said the risk assessment is just half the battle, risk treatment's the other half, and the statement of applicability just basically says, why do you need to do this? Why are these important? Here's what we've identified, here's what you fix, and this is just the document that lists it out. So it is considered comprehensive but not exhaustive, and you can add other controls if you wish. Okay, so now after you've got your risk assessment, you've got your risk treatment, you actually have to run it. You got to do this stage 5. You've got to run your risk treatment plan. It's going to implement each control. You as a CISO don't have to do everything. You maybe, if you're a manufacturing company, you have a plant. Perhaps the implementation plan or action plan involves the plant manager. So you have to sit and think about who does what, to specify which controls you need to implement and who's responsible for them, and also sets the deadlines and the priority. In doing your risk assessment, you might have a red alert thing. That's something you need to get to right away, but other things can wait 6 months. So you move from theory to practice. It's been purely theoretical. Now you got to do it. So it's a document that enables the transition in ISO terms, the plan phase to the do phase, and you start living the document that you define. Okay, it's very important to understand these 5 steps that need to be formed sequentially, and you can't implement them unless you know which of them are important. You need to know what the safeguards are, and you're going to need help. If you don't define the rules for the whole process, it will fall apart. It doesn't have to be complicated. Okay, so once you've once you've done this, you need to document your results. ISO is very good about documentation, and I actually like that framework a little better than NIST for providing you with recommendations on documentation. You can go online. There are online tools. If you were to go Google risk assessment automation software, you'll find many. Most organizations use spreadsheets. I'm just going to be honest with you. You don't have to pay for it. You could get samples. You could buy samples. You can make your own. So, I mean, personally, I'd say GSI use spreadsheets. All right. And I'll show it. I'll show you ours in a minute. So spreadsheets work. Do they work for very large companies? You'll have to assess that. I think it does. I don't think you need to pay for the software, but maybe you want reminders. Maybe you want control reminders so that you don't have to think about the frameworks. So you should always have your management team review and revise the risks in addition to all its risk owners. So just something to keep track of. Plan to make updates at a minimum of once a year. Some companies, larger companies, this is an ongoing process. So to say minimum once a year, it's continual. So it just depends on your company. So we've listed a bunch of success factors to help you get through it. Develop a culture. Again, I'm not going to read all these because I've got some stuff that I want to talk to you about or want to show you. So I'll save this, the success factors, for you to read through on your own. Everything needs to be systematic, documented, and understood, and people assigned, and then do a statement of applicability, even if you don't think you need one, just so that you link your documents together. And run your implementation plan. Okay, I'm gonna take a second out from the presentation and just show you some files. I'll show you GSI's risk assessment that we did. I just basically did it in Microsoft Word. Actually, our legal department helped me with this. It's one example, um, and we basically defined a purpose, gave some questions, did some definitions, and then what we did is we started defining our overall area of risk. And ISO does a pretty good job. Mentioned Annex A. It has 14 general categories, 114 individual risks inside of it. NIST CSF is a monstrosity. So we basically just assigned a value of low, medium, high to the risk and the frequency that it can occur. And I just checked a box. And then I just used a binary approach. If you're into computers or computer mathematics, this column means 1, this column means 2, and this column means 4. So if I had 2 highs here, that would be a 4, and a 4 would be an 8. And you can see I've got a low and a low, each worth 1. So basically my values can range from 2 to 8 in my assessment. So we just looked though, what are the likelihood that we have violations of contract? It could happen at GSI. It's not low. Government is low because we don't do a whole lot of government contracts. And how often or how well we do this 3 or 4 or 5 times a month, so it's not low frequency, it's a medium frequency. So I gave it an assessment of 4, a little bit higher than a 2. Now let's scroll down and see some here. Improper record keeping, destruction of records, legal holds. What is the impact to us? Well, if that happens, it's very high. What's the likelihood of it happening? Well, it's not non-existent. So again, this is a 2 right here. This is a 4. I added them up. I came to a 6, and I determined anything that is a 6 or higher is a yellow alert. Now let's go down here to some red alerts. All right. So here's one in IT. The general category is information technology, my responsibility. Failure to protect data systems against misuse or unauthorized access by employees. If that happened to us, it could be devastating. And guess what? There's a high probability that could happen. So I got a 4 and a 4. That's an 8. This is something I need to protect against. So this is just the risk assessment. This is not the risk treatment. I've only identified this as a problem at this point. And then we get to risk treatment. Then what do I do about it? But this is something I have to concentrate on. Inappropriate or unexpected data loss. Yeah. Somebody could go into our NetSuite system and blow away all of our vendors. And all of our customers. Would that be horrible? Sure. It could delay us generating new sales and put us in serious harm. So it's something we've got to mitigate against. So we just go through the various different agencies. This is just something we put together ourselves. This is not, I think it came from a legal repertoire from our legal team, not from an IT source. I can show you some other examples here. And we just went through it. It's a 12-page document, guys. It's not that complicated. We just listed out the things that could harm us. All right, so now let me pull up another one here. This is one that I got from an ISO training company. Um, Basically, we don't use this one, but it was something that you could use a spreadsheet for. We just assign a number to them, and basically consequence, likelihood, risk owner, very similar to the previous sheet or previous spreadsheet. Um, and I just wanted you to see it. And also notice we've got some suggested assets, things that I discussed in the presentation, some threats that could happen to you, and some vulnerabilities, and you could make things drop down boxes from that over here if you wanted to. Now, I also wanted to show you a risk treatment table. And again, this is just a spreadsheet. I hadn't gotten this far yet on our document, so I don't have much to it. But basically, you'd put the number would correspond um, to the risk assessment table, but just some options. And there's only 4. We've talked about those. Selection of controls, transference, risk avoidance, and risk acceptance. And then this is the ISO 27001 Annex A treatment codes. And you notice, let's see, 3 through, if we scroll down, you'll see there's 116 minus 2 is 114 controls. So those are the numbered ISO controls. All right, now let's go from the ISO controls to the NIST controls. Okay, I'll pull up that spreadsheet and you can see that next. All right, so this document is humongous. And, you know, there's literally, let's go all the way down to the bottom. There are roughly 1,180 controls with deep control descriptions and a discussion of when and how you would use it. So now you know why I said that even if you're using ISO, I'd highly recommend reviewing the controls in the NIST framework, because the volume of data, the completeness of it, in my opinion, exceeds that of ISO. A couple other things I wanted to show you. GSI wrote a risk treatment methodology. So we just risk assessment. And so this is our methodology. We just basically, one thing you want to do, especially if you're in ISO world, make sure you put the date down. Also, if you're getting a SOC audit, you're finding everything I have to do with our SOC audit, you have to have a date modifier at the beginning of it and an approver. And basically, we wrote our own methodology and how to work with it. And that's what we were working off of. Let's see, do I have anything else I want to show you? No, I think that's it. So I'll go back to the presentation and turn it back over to Brittany in a minute. Okay, so question is, do you do this yourself or bring in the experts, or both? You know, it could be daunting, especially if it's your first time. I'm an ISO 27001 certified lead implementer. I've done it. I can do it. But you know, maybe that's not in your budget to bring somebody in. Or maybe you could bring somebody in to help you define your methodology and provide you with the sample documentation. Then you go off and do it yourself, and you bring somebody back to help you audit it. That's the both side of it. So it's up to you based on the amount of time you have and the amount of commitment that you can have. And then my last slide for your next steps, if you're in charge or have the ability, you select your team who's going to work on it, identify and document your risks, and then go for it. Get going on it. So Brittany, it's all yours. I talked a long time.
No, that was great, John. Thank you so much. I will just.
How do I stop sharing? Sorry, it was
Yeah,
my first.
I can do it. I got it.
You got it? It's my first time using Zoom for present. I'm used to go to webinar.
All right, let me, yeah, me too. So I'm like, let me see how I do this. For some reason, it's just with yours. I'm sorry. Give me just a second. All right, here we go. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. All right. How about now?
Now we do.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. And I I just wanted to cover just a few items and just mention our educational resources that we offer here at GSI. We do provide weekly educational webcasts, a monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider. We have an online resource center where you can get your access to on-demand webcasts, white papers, etc. We have a YouTube channel that has tons of like on-demand videos, how-to videos, just everything you can think of there. And then we also are doing virtual workshops. If you would like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts, our monthly newsletter, or to create an account, you can access our resource center at getgsi.com. Click resources and events, and then you'll want to click on your platform. And here we have a couple of upcoming events. We do have an orchestrator workshop coming up on December the 2nd. And then we have a hands-on upgrade workshop Tuesday, November the 17th. So if you would like to register for either one of those, you can go to getgsi.com and go to conferences and events and register there. You can check out our ERP Talk, which is a problem-solving forum where you can get your enterprise application questions answered, as well as contribute to others' questions. And here you can keep up with us on social media. All of our handles are currently listed on the screen. And then for our GSI Executive Series, you can just stay tuned. And when you sign up for the Resource Center, you can get access, you'll get reminders of what's coming up. So I would highly recommend doing that for sure. And we will move on to our Q&A session. Let me see if we have any questions, John. As of right now, we do not have any questions. If you do think of any questions that you may have after the webcast, you can email them to info@getgsi.com and we'll respond pretty quickly and get those questions answered for you. And again, we just want to thank everyone for attending our webcast today. At the end of the webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey. Anyone who attended the entire webcast will be submitted into a drawing to win an Amazon gift card. I just want to thank John again, and then thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everybody. We're kind of at the end, so we ran a little late. Thank you.
Thanks.